Hello everybody, I am not dead yet, and the heaviest boxing match in history has come and gone, and I am here to give my thoughts on it. So, obviously, everyone should know by now, Thor won, and in my prediction, I said that Thor was going to win, and I also kind of predicted how the fight was going to go in my previous video. If you haven't seen it already, I do recommend giving it a watch because, hey, it'll give you a little bit of insight on both the fighting styles of the opponents, and it'll allow you to better understand this video, but, to summarize, I basically just said that Thor's gonna have to try to keep Eddie away, Eddie's gonna have to try and burrow in, and the fight in general will probably be more interesting in the earlier rounds. If it gets past round 1, it's probably just going to be a glorified staring contest between two exhausted giants. And in my opinion, I was completely right. That's what happened. Now, it wasn't quite as extreme, but after the first round, and even a little bit of the first round, was basically just Thor and Eddie having this glorified staring contest where they circle the ring and then they kind of pick at each other. They'll throw like 1, maybe 2, but none of them really commit to anything and follow up on any of the opportunities they create with their punches. Eddie Hall throughout the entire thing was searching for this massive overhand, which that can work actually. Again, I've said it before, I really like the overhand, and even his little Philly shell arm down style works out fairly well. The only issue is he was doing it to Thor in Southpaw, and Thor is a Southpaw. Now, it is actually a valid, if you can fight Southpaw, it is a valid strategy to fight Southpaw against the Southpaw because nobody really is used to fighting Southpaws. They can throw people off, even those who are used to fighting Southpaw. But one, I don't think somebody who's been boxing for only 2 years is really ready to start stance switching. Like, you really want to make sure you have a mastery of orthodox or whatever style you started out with, your first style, before you try and switch stances and work on another one because, well, you're basically starting over from zero. And so, when you have to relearn everything in another stance, whether it's orthodox or southpaw, that takes time. You go back, it's back to the mirror, throwing jabs in front of the mirror just to get the muscle memory down, and the time that you spend practicing in southpaw is time that is taken away from what you could be doing in orthodox, mastering that. So, but the issue with Eddie fighting southpaw against southpaw with Thor and trying to do the, I'll keep my arm down and go for that overhand, is the fact that it would actually be more effective of a technique had he done it orthodox. Why? Because in southpaw, when you're in a close stance simply means that both feet the lead foot are not the same, because it'll create kind of a boxed in sort of area versus an open one where there's a side that there is no foot there. When you're in a closed stance and you throw on the opposite side, right, Thor's hand is up. So if Thor is throwing his right jab and Eddie throws his right overhand, Eddie's going to have his left hand, or Thor is going to have his left hand up, and he'll just eat the punch on the glove, which is what happened a lot of the time. Either Thor was able to step back, or he simply blocked it. However, if you're in an open stance, right, and you have your arm down, like Eddie was doing, what you can do is you can use that to bait out a jab, and then fire off your overhand over top. Eddie didn't do that at all. He was sticking with one. He would often go down like this, cock it up, and then fire it off, and that's extremely predictable. In boxing, it's not the punch you see that's cocked up, loaded, and ready to throw that knocks you out. It's the one you don't. It's the one that's hidden behind 2 or 3 other punches, the one where you think, okay, I dodged all those, I'm saying, boom! Where did that come from? That is the punch that knocks you out. And so, sure, like, both of these men are massive, and pretty much any punch has the potential to knock the other out. It would have been better had Eddie tried to set things up and follow through with anything, because really all Eddie did was pick at jabs at Thor, and he really needed to rush. He needed to push the action. Honestly speaking, especially considering the fact that Eddie pretty much used not a lot of skill at all, I'm gonna be frank. He had his hands down, and he was basically just like staring at Thor, and I don't know if this is because of energy reasons or both men respected each other's power, but Eddie didn't push the action. And if I said it before, if Eddie wanted to win, that is what he needed to do. He needed to be the aggressor. Thor's not going to be the aggressor. If he can just stand back at long range and jab the crap out of Eddie for the entirety of the fight, that is what he should do. And he did. And I said that, you know, taller fighters can just hang back and jab at the person. It's up to the shorter fighter to push the action and get in to give that taller fighter trouble. So at the end of the day, I think Thor did what he needed to do and what he was supposed to do way better than Eddie did. Eddie cannot... My SD card ran out of memory. Anyway, Eddie cannot box Thor on the outside. Eddie should not be trying to take center ring. He should have been up close and personal with Thor for the entirety of the 6 rounds, pushing him back against the ropes, getting him out of the corner where Thor can't circle him. And let's talk about circling, because I do have a few notes here that I took. And, for Eddie, I basically wrote down relying on haymakers. He was relying so solely on haymakers that he didn't even bother to set them up. He'd throw a jab and then he'd stay cocked and then throw it. I've already mentioned why you shouldn't do that. He had his hands down, which allowed Thor to just jab the crap out of him. He got cut over both eyes. He wouldn't push the action, heavy on the back foot, and that's another thing. It's not that he wasn't only just not pushing the action. Oftentimes, he was heavy on the back foot. As a shorter fighter, it's okay to do that sometimes, but you cannot be heavy on the back foot for the majority of a fight. You need to get in. As evidence, and that's why it caused Thor to often, instead of actually jumping forward, because when you do that sort of gazelle hook, what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to have that arm down, maybe lean slightly forward to kind of bait that chin, and when that jab comes out, you jump up. Thor was tall, and he had his arm down like this, and he would throw, and he would overshoot it, and he would lean forward, and he would fall forward. What you're supposed to do with that, because when you're a shorter fighter, you're supposed to get shorter. So you have your arm down, you get shorter like this, right? Bend your knees, have that chin out, wait for the bait, and as soon as you see it, you jump up, you spring forward, and you come forward with your entire body. So if you can see here, you're down like this, you jump up and you jump forward. What Thor was doing is he was up tall, he had his arm down, and he would lunge forward like this. Or I guess that he was in southpaw, so he would be like this, and then he'd lunge forward like this, and he'd whiff, and then he'd be off balance. And because he was off balance, he couldn't follow up with anything, which again leads to the fact that he'd used no combos and was relying basically on a Hail Mary knockout, which again, it's feasible for him, but it's not something you should rely on as your fight strategy. A Hail Mary knockout, it should not be what you're relying on. And one of the main things I noticed too is that, and this just shows a simple lack of knowledge, but again, that shouldn't be an excuse because Eddie knew Thor was a southpaw, so they should have tailored their training to that. When Thor was circling Eddie, he was circling to Thor's left. He was circling to Thor's left. You do not circle left with a southpaw because that is putting you in prime position for that cross, which is probably why Thor was able to land that solid cross twice throughout the fight, crank Eddie's neck and drop him to the canvas. Let's also couple that with the fact that Eddie kept his hands down by his waist. Had Eddie kept his hands up and circled right to try and position his lead left foot outside of Thor's lead right foot, that would inhibit Thor's movement and he would better set him up for that overhand right that he was so desperately trying to land throughout the entire fight. I'm honestly shocked at how many mistakes that he made because these aren't crazy things. These are basic strategy when fighting a southpaw. And we keep talking about how these guys are some top-level athletes, so you think they'd be able to afford trainers that would tell them this shit. Like, I don't know what went on between him and his trainer, but I'm shaking my head at the trainer because Eddie should not have been making these mistakes. They knew that Thor was a southpaw, and so they should have been able to specifically tailor their fight strategy to Thor, but when Eddie went in there, it seemed like he didn't have a fight strategy. It was just Hail Mary knockout. And I've been always wondering that throughout this entirety of the training camp that I've seen. They had 2 years to prepare for this. I'm going, what the hell is Thor's trainer doing? Why isn't Thor's trainer telling him this shit? Why isn't Thor's trainer telling him to get his hands up? Why is he making these basic, easy mistakes? This is fighting a southpaw 101. And why is he making these mistakes? It doesn't make any sense. As for Thor, I actually don't have a lot to say bad about Thor. The only thing I really have to say is Thor didn't really push the action in the first 2 rounds, and so I gave them to Eddie. But in the end, near the 3rd round, he started actually doing what he was supposed to do. He stayed back, he made Eddie miss, and he just threw out a ton of jabs to get into Eddie's face and frustrate him. It's just like I said in the previous video, Eddie went wild, relying on haymakers, whereas Thor was more calm, collected, had his hands up, and just did what he needed to do. I really don't have any issues with anything Thor did. Now, if you're wondering how I scored the fight, the official thing was a unanimous decision with 54 to 57 in favor of Thor. Which, okay, that's fair enough. I scored the fight 55-56 in favor of Thor because I actually thought that the push that Eddie was awarded in the 2nd round was an actual knockdown. The way I saw it, they said he pushed him. Maybe it looked different from the angle of the ring, but from what I saw, it was he got hit in the side of the head and Thor went down. Again, maybe there's another angle that I missed or didn't see, which led the judges and the ref, because the ref is in there, to see that Eddie actually pushed Thor to the ground. But I awarded Eddie a knockdown in the 2nd round as opposed to not, because I believe that it actually was a knockdown. So I still think that Thor came out on top. And while I do think the fight was actually relatively close because neither man was really aggressive and showing extreme dominance, I think that my score, and even the score of the judges, ultimately reflects the fight as a whole. It was a relatively close match between 2 people who were of equal-ish skill level. It's just that Thor showed more mastery of the sport, mastery over his skills, more strategy, and did what he needed to do best, which is how 10-point must systems are scored. In boxing, any round, the winner of the round gets 10 points, the loser of a round gets 9, unless they get a knockdown, in which case it's 8, and the criteria are things like skill, punch landed, aggression, ring dominance, etc. And so, honestly speaking, in terms of what I thought of the fight overall, it was a decent card. I didn't watch the whole card, I just watched the main event, but it was a decent main event, especially for free, if aside from all of the massive issues with extreme crashes and stuff like that. But assuming you got to watch the whole thing, it was a decent event with some alright displays, but realistically speaking, it was if we're talking actual skill level, it was a pretty crappy amateur card. For what it was, entertaining enough for the people involved, and the fact that it was free. But if I had to pay for it, or if they tried to hype it up as anything more than that, it really wouldn't be worth paying for. But it was free, and they kind of advertised it as it was, so I can't really fault them on that. But that was just my thoughts on the fight between Hafthor Bjornsson and Eddie Hall. Congrats to both combatants. They both deserve the respect for stepping into the ring and doing that. Anyone who steps into the ring deserves respect. In my opinion, it is an incredibly brave thing to do. And kudos to Eddie Hall for being a good sport about losing, especially considering this whole fight started because apparently Thor was a poor sport about losing. So kudos to Eddie for setting the example and sticking to his beliefs. But until the next one, I would like to thank all of my Patreon supporters who support me on Patreon. It's because of you guys that I am allowed to do this. It encouraged me to keep doing this. So yeah, if you want to support me, all of my links, PayPal, Patreon, TikTok, and affiliates will be in the description. Please go check them out. And until next time, remember, only the strong subscribe. I am not dead yet, and if you are not either, there is always a tomorrow waiting for you.